What's up, people? This your favorite cousin Rich. Now, the new buzz that's hitting YouTube streets and the internet is Jillian Michaels talking about how slavery wasn't that bad. Check this out.
And you cannot tie imperialism and racism and slavery to just one race, which is pretty much what every single exhibit does. But let's talk about the fact that when you
anti-slavery,
let's talk about the fact
slavery in America was.
Do you realize that only less than 2% of white Americans owned slaves?
But it was a system of white supremacy.
You realize that slavery is thousands of years old?
White people were
Do you know
the slave
who
owners.
was the first race to try to end slavery?
Now, when I heard this, I just got completely disgusted. I did. Now, I used to watch Jillian Michaels, Biggest Loser when I was a little kid and all that. But her political stance and how she feels about certain things, this just shows me how ignorant she is. It's funny when the black guy on CNN tried to correct her and say, slavery was about white supremacy. She had nothing to say about that. But just to break down a couple facts, when she said 2% of Americans own slaves, she doesn't understand that was the powerful 2% of America that owned slaves. Just like, we look at the 5% or the 1% of America or the world who controls the world. You know how powerful that is? So if we take that into context and say, 2% of Americans own slaves, that was a powerful 2% of the people. So let's say those 2% of the people made up 75% of the money that was in America. That's a lot, correct? But to really be correct, it wasn't 2% of the people. 8% of Americans by 1860 owned slaves. 1 out of 3 households in the South owned slaves. So this whole idea of 2% of Americans owned slaves was looking at the entire population of the U.S. See? But like I said, slave ownership was only concentrated among the wealthy elite. Again, the wealthy elite. Poor whites and immigrants couldn't afford slaves, but they still benefited from racial hierarchy. Now, she tried to back up and say, slavery's been around for thousands and thousands of years, which is correct. We had the Greeks had slaves, Romans had slaves, Africans had slaves. Everybody had slaves. That's correct. But at that time, certain slaves were captives of war. Certain people owed debts. Certain people were punished. So their punishment was slavery, correct? But in America, we had a different type of slavery. We had chattel slavery. Again, chattel slavery. And the effects of chattel slavery was hereditary, meaning your kids were slaves. See, if you were in other countries or other parts of the world and you were a slave, your kids might not have been a slave if you were just punished for it. You see what I'm saying? You were just punished for something, you had to be a slave. Your kids might not have been slaves. But over here in America, if you had kids, they were slaves. In other parts of the world, when they had slavery, you had ways to buy yourself out of freedom. In America, in the beginning of slavery, not towards the end, but in the beginning of slavery, in the thick parts of slavery, it was permanent. You had no way to buy your way out. It was no way for you to buy. You were property. You were somebody's property. Not because you were a criminal. Not because you were a captive of war. Not because you owed somebody debt. No. Because they wanted free labor. So they went to another country and held you captive and brought you over here and made you work. And a lot of the slavery that was here in America that was not comparable to other countries was in America, in America, slavery was tied to race. Again, American slavery was tied to race. And this is one thing that she just completely overlooks and doesn't want to talk about. On top of the dehumanizing conditions that Africans and African Americans were put through, we weren't seen as people. We were seen as property. On top of that, property that people had a disgust for. And this is one thing that she doesn't want to talk about. This is one thing that people that just love to glance over and skip over. Is these parts right here. Again, slavery in America was not about just labor. It was constructing a racial hierarchy where blacks were slaves and whites were free. This was not accidental. Again, this was not accidental. It was systematically designed and defended by law, religion, and science. Something that other countries, when they had slavery, was not backed by. In other countries, it was purely about labor or war debts. Captures of war or debts or punishment. So granted, only a minority owned slaves. Yes, correct. But the entire white population benefited socially and economically from the system of slavery. Again, only a minority of people owned slaves, yes. But the entire white population benefited socially and economically from from the slavery system. And you can still see the effects of it today. Whereas other parts of the world where they had slavery, you don't see it so much. You don't see the effects, the after effects, the aftershocks of slavery. And the biggest thing about this that really hurts me is when you see all the other people, or other Americans, white Americans say, see, slavery wasn't that bad. See, black people are always complaining about how things are so bad. Slavery was bad, this. They're using this comment by Jillian Michaels to further the ignorance. And I think that's what hurts more. It's the furthering of this ignorance that people take this and run with it instead of sitting down and really doing your research. And this is why I tell black people it's so important to have African in front of American. Because when you take that African away from African American, it wipes away who you really are. It wipes away your history. It wipes away what this country really did to you. Instead of just assimilating to be American. It don't benefit us. Now, I'm not saying I don't like America. I'm not saying I hate America. I'm not saying any of that. What I'm saying is you have to remember who you are. And don't let them try to minimize the effects that was done to you. Again, the slavery that was taking place against our people in this country was one of the worst, if not the worst, types of slavery that was ever seen upon this whole world. And don't let them minimize that. Let me know how y'all feel about this. This is your favorite cousin Rich. Y'all be safe out there. Love and blessings.